All right, well, welcome to today's Recovery Live. My name is Kristen Harper. I'm a woman living in long-term recovery and actually have a recovery anniversary coming up next March. It'll be 20 years. I cannot believe that. That is just blows my mind. I'm very excited about this conversation today. I've been looking forward to it all month. We have some dynamic speakers and our moderator is fantastic. I'm gonna quickly walk everyone through the technology and a little bit of housekeeping before we get started with the discussion. I promise it'll be quick and painless. As you're coming in the room, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box. We'd love to know who's with us and where you're from. Next slide, please. So I'm with C4 Innovations, a recovery specialist, and we do a lot around the country, a lot of work in the recovery space and in equity spaces, advancing recovery, wellness, and housing stability for people who are marginalized. We are committed to reducing disparities and achieving equitable outcomes and developing and implementing research-based solutions that are person-centered, recovery-oriented, and trauma-informed. If we can be of any assistance to you in the future with your projects, please let us know and reach out via these platforms. Next slide, please. So today you're in listen-only mode, which means that you will not be asked to speak. I know that is a big sigh of relief for those of you that are attending. You will be able to ask questions and speak to our audience or to our panelists through the chat box. If you do have questions or comments, go ahead and enter those into the chat box. We'll be tracking those and make sure that they get to the speakers today during our presentation. If you have any questions, same deal, just go ahead and either type them in the Q&A box or in the chat box. Next slide, please. We are also recording this particular presentation and it will be on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com C4 Innovations. Next slide, please. So now is the fun part. I get to introduce my friend Robert Simba, who is trained in many things, including cultural studies, medical anthropology, and arts. He's also a teacher at the New School in New York City. I am honored to call him my friend and a fellow recovery warrior. Robert, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Everyone enjoy.
Thanks so much, Kristen. So hi, everybody. My name is Robert Simba. My pronouns are he and him and they and them. And I identify as a gay man and a person in mental health recovery. So I'm going to give you a very sort of just quick introduction to each of our panelists today. Michael Roberson is a public health specialist and community organizer affiliated with the Center for Race, Religion, and Economic Democracy. For close to 30 years, Michael has been a member of the LGBTQ+ and POC-led house and ballroom community, which we'll be hearing more about later. Jennifer Lee is the Assistant Director of the Bureau of Community Chronic Disease Prevention at the New York State Department of Health. In her professional and community work, Jennifer addresses health inequities and health injustices in diverse communities. In 2015, she founded the grassroots House Lives Matter initiative. And Michael Rice is an award-winning filmmaker, producer, choreographer, and creative director for stage and film for over 10 years. With over 10 years of experience in television, regional theater, and other creative fields. We will be talking a little bit today about his just remarkable documentary, Party Boy. So do you folks just want to say a quick hi, Michael?
Just hi, and I'm blessed to be here.
All right, and we're blessed to have you. And Jennifer?
Hi, everyone. I'm so honored to be here and excited to have this discussion with my family.
Thanks, Jennifer. Big virtual hug. And Michael Rice? You're on mute, Michael.
Okay, there we go. Sorry. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here and to have the opportunity to share this panel with wonderful people.
All right. Thank you so much. So we I think, have a somewhat unusual panel today or process today. If you've attended prior recovery live events. We will not be having the kinds of PowerPoint presentations that you may be used to in the past. We really are going to just be speaking from the heart. I want to just say a couple of sort of framing statements before I turn it over to our panelists. So at C4, I work to bring a public health understanding to the many issues we address in our work. Public health acknowledges that every person's experience, including our recovery experiences, occur within a community context. Public health approaches, and there's good public health approaches, are also guided by principles of social justice. We ask how individual recovery relates to collective recovery and community well-being, and we identify and address structures of oppression, discrimination, inequity, and social violence. At C4, for example, we are currently engaged in deep and sustained conversations regarding the connection between recovery and anti-racist frameworks and practices. What recovery brings to public health, in turn, is the power of lived experience and the collective leadership of people in recovery. Recovery pushes public health to be with and not simply about or at a distance from community life. This means that our stories and the stories of those we love and those who love us, as well as the stories of our ancestors, are a crucial source of wisdom. For those of us who identify as and live our lives as queer or gender nonconforming or as non-binary persons, these relationships to community can be very complicated. Sometimes they're deeply wounding and violent. Our recovery often requires finding or creating new community and new family. And I am thrilled to say that today I am here with members of my family, my queer family, and my recovery family. Yes, we are grounded in years of public health training and practice. A lot of our learning has come through HIV/AIDS related experiences and initiatives, but we are first and foremost kin and friends and comrades. Our conversation today is nested within years, and for Michael Roberson and me, decades of work together. In our brief time today, we will try to speak some truths about the unfolding of each of our stories into the larger stories of our people, specifically the house and ballroom community. So, with my 2 cents on the table, Michael, may I invite you to tell us about the community I've just mentioned, the house and ballroom community, and how they became family and home for you and for many others who may love their birth families and birth communities, but are not necessarily loved by them in return. I know you understand very well how issues of mental health and substance use and recovery exist within this complex context. So over to you.
So Robert, if I'm sure people have, but I want to repeat it in this public forum, that you write so absolutely brilliantly wonderful. It's always so seamless in the way that you write and the propositions that you open up this dialogue with. So I want to start first and foremost in my Cornell West, right? To answer that question from theologizing what it meant to come through the womb of my mother, to be born through the womb of this Black woman who, in my belief system, was my very first conversation with that in which I call God or cosmology or universe, that in that womb, God planted the very truth about who I was in the very DNA of my cells, so that when I came out to the world, and the world began to tell me a different story about who I was, that the truth in the cells of my DNA stood up and said, don't believe that lie. I start there because for me, had not been my mother, I wouldn't be in ballroom, because I didn't go to ballroom searching for a family. I went to ballroom to extend that in which my mother gave me. It was an absolute, one of the greatest gifts was to be born through her. But you're absolutely right. This space, let me back into that. It's so wonderful that we're having this conversation in this moment after sort of the insurrection that happened in January, after a year ago almost, the continued rise of Black Lives Matter in response to police violence. And what I call this is the birth of a new nation. And ballroom, as you and I have talked about for so long, has not only something to say, but really to teach the world over what it means to be human in its struggle and quest for freedom in the face of catastrophe, particularly now in the space of a global pandemic that we call COVID, right? Almost 100 years later than the Spanish flu, that then led to the political artistic response that Jennifer reminded me of the Harlem Renaissance, and which was the birth of the drag ball community, the drag ball freedom movement, if you will. And so I just think it's the absolute wonderful time. I've been in the scene for almost about 27 years. I'm originally from Camden, New Jersey. And so the Philadelphia scene was the scene that I was close to, that I came out, if you will, into the house ball community, was blessed enough to not only be in part of scenes there, but to experience people like Kwame Banks, who not only was a ballroom leader, a ballroom organizer, but a public health official, and he intersected very, very seamlessly this thing around community organizing and being popular, if you will, right, in ballroom community, but grounded in a sort of kind of Black radical aesthetic tradition of Black gay men, of Joseph Bean, right, of Essex Cynthia, of Marlon Riggs, unapologetically. And it was awing for me. It was absolutely awing to see him move in that way. And the construction then to see, or for me to witness the constructions of houses of this notion of having a mother and a father and children. One, because of being so ostracized out of your own family of origin. But when we think about other families, and we think about communal families being ostracized in many ways out of the Black struggle for freedom because of our sexuality, and being ostracized in many ways out of the quest around AIDS organizing because of classism and a larger Black gay organizing initiative. I mean, so here's this very marginalized community fending for itself, creating for itself, responding to not only the AIDS epidemic and had no voice to advocate for it, but being in many ways this intersection of AIDS crisis, right? And the impact of what crack had did in the 80s to Black folk. And so we saw it, but at the same time, we saw so many folk passing away. I think about when you look at the documentary Paris is Burning, that you see millions of people who are no longer here, right? So the AIDS crisis took out leaders, took out ministers, if you will, right? Took out organizers, took out parents of a community that was left to fend for itself. But in the words of Black women, Black feminists, or Black womanists, ballroom made a way out of no way. And it was absolutely, utterly so important. I was blessed to move to New York City to expand the work that I was doing in public health, because I worked for the Kansas City Board of Education, and looked to target the work, not only around the house ball ballroom community, but particularly around Black and we were calling folks Latino at that time, LGBT young folk, and work with my former boss to create some things, but to invoice ballroom in a certain kind of way. I say that to say that you and I had a not just a colleague, but a mentor, if you will, called Albert Santana. And so if I was influenced by Kwame Bake in Philadelphia, when I moved to New York City, Albert Santana, one of the founders of the House of Latex Project, again, organizing ballroom because so many organizations did not deal with the house ball ballroom community. We were blessed to do work with him and to expand that kind of work. And him situating himself as this very bigger than life, Afro-Latino in his consciousness, right? As a mother of the House of Latex, having to address not only, again, issues around the AIDS crisis, but other intersection disparities. And so I was blessed to do that kind of work and be blessed by those kinds of people. I think I like this conversation for a couple of reasons. This notion of recovery, we look at it, if we can open it up, this what we're thinking about recovery, we think about recovery in relationship to substance use, but never recovery in relationship to patriarchy, never recovery in relationship to the impact of homophobia, right? Never recovery in the relationship to white supremacy. And that is the space that I think that we have got to engage this dialogue. I think that we miss the mark if we don't. Last thing I'll say about that is I remember, must have been around 2002, 2003. I was blessed enough to be on a panel. I was at the Gay and Lesbian Center. There were two white gay men, I can remember their names, who one of the first to address, had a critique that gay men's health crisis was not doing enough work around the AIDS crisis in Chelsea, but this relationship to substance use. Make a long story short, they had no idea that the numbers in terms of HIV incidence and prevalence was in Black Latino community. So they had this panel discussion around this. It was a community event. Larry Kramer was on the panel. And Larry Kramer, creative, not only when it creates the GMAC, but ACT UP. And he began talking about this thing called crystal meth and its impact on the gay community. Now, Black gay men who did the work misdiagnosed it. It was a misnomer to believe that this was just a white gay man, right? And, you know, and one of the things I said was that we're confusing population versus space. So that if you, for instance, went to Black gay spaces or Black gay clubs, the drug of choice would be marijuana, of course, alcohol, but marijuana, cocaine, and ecstasy. But if you went to predominantly white gay spaces or white gay clubs, the drug of choice would be, there's no marijuana, it would be ecstasy, crystal meth, liquid G, and special K. And that there were Black gay men who, when they went to Black gay clubs, may not indulge in crystal meth use, but indulged when they went to white gay spaces. And to believe that that was just going to stay in that space was the thing that we miss. You begin to see the stigma that began to rise around crystal meth use with white gay men. So they went underground in their uses, and Black gay men began to not only, interesting enough, I won't say politicize, but be very open about their use. You look when a lot of the sort of the gay sort of hookup websites, you see Black gay men publicize it, but you begin to see the numbers continue to increase. And my great friend Martha Trono Helsley in Los Angeles is one of the first ones begin to look at this relationship to sex work, young gay men, and sex work and crystal meth use, and people seroconverting to become an HIV positive. And so it's oftentimes when we think about today, it's lost. Thank God for Michael Rice's documentary, because the opioid epidemic in many ways have overshadowed, have usurped the narrative around crystal meth. Most folk outside of the gay community, particularly Black Latino gay community, have no idea that this is an epidemic, right?
Thanks so much, Michael. So you're starting to sort of really build this intersectional architecture of these many different kinds of vectors that we need to understand. The space, the cultural space, the historical frameworks that have been oppressive, that in many ways organize and structure experience. And we need to be thinking about recovery in relation to those very large sort of structures and practices. I'm beginning to sort of hear a really rich and complex kind of ecological understanding of the recovery framework that people exist in. I'm going to come back to you because there's a bunch of stuff there that I know you have some thoughts about that I think we really need to be putting on the table. But let me switch over to Jennifer a little bit, because I know Jennifer, you know, as a public health scholar and a public health practitioner, you also are very committed to this kind of deep intersectional understanding of the kinds of concerns of community and how recovery exists within this complex understanding of things. But let's begin with just you sharing with us what brings you into this work and what holds you in this work. I'm then going to ask you and Michael to talk a little bit about the COVID work that you're doing and what this is sort of revealing about these long histories that Michael has begun to unpack for us. But first, maybe you can just tell us how you are held by and how you hold the community in your work.
Sure. Thank you, Robert. So I'm someone who is also healing and recovering every day. And, you know, on this journey to kind of living my best life and being the best person I can be, you know, and I realize that my story is not a part of this specifically, but I have to talk about it because it has been so deeply intertwined with my chosen community and my chosen family, which is ballroom. And so dealing with anxiety and depression, but also addiction, you know, I think sometimes we think about behavioral health, mental health, and addiction just being reduced to a diagnosis. But my reasons for the conditions that I have to, and the concerns that I have in my behavioral health, mental health, and addiction is deeply entangled with my entire life of complex intersecting stressors, trauma, microaggressions, oppression, including racism, classism, sexism, colonization, and xenophobia. And that when you bring these things all together, reducing that just to a clinical diagnosis is just not enough, you know? It is so deeply connected to the social and political environment in which I've had to survive and live. And it was all about my environment and the things that I experienced: homelessness at 16 for exploring my sexuality, abusive and violent boyfriend, you know, systems that oppress my family for not speaking English and not being citizens. Um, Growing up and being one of the only like people of color in my classes, always afraid, scanning the room for danger, safety, acceptance, being othered, while also in a deep cultural war about my own identity as, you know, my Korean heritage, but American colonization, and not being enough for either of those two communities. And it caused all these behaviors to lead to this anxiety and depression and also addictive behaviors. And through this process of healing, you know, I found my purpose and meaning in life. You know, the thing that was causing me the most pain or trying to kill me was the very reason why I survived. And so fighting racial and social justice issues, as well as human rights work, you know, the things that cause all of what I'm dealing with now and having to heal and recover from, became my ultimate purpose and life goal. And it's a very interesting space to be. And so when you ask me why I'm here, I mean, this is what community meant to me and helped me understand that part of my life that I wouldn't have recovered the same had I not had ballroom in my space. And, you know, what really holds me here today is, you know, our recovery oriented care, our recovery support systems built in ballroom around harm reduction principles have just been so integral to managing our conditions. And our recovery process is about holding space for transformation, which we're doing here today. And like a lot of like my community, my family, and being and allowing unconditional love and unconditional acceptance to flow through you, it just shifts our conversations from debate, good and bad, to being more on a journey of discovery, connections, understanding, compassion. And our recovery process through that in the community is the change through which, you know, our people improve their holistic health and wellness, live, you know, self-directed, empowered, and powerful lives, and then strive to reach their full potential. And, you know, recovery are really the stories that we tell. And I think it's never about what happens to us, but like what meaning we attribute to it. And so while recovery has been, or healing has been, such a painful journey, because the more you focus on the pain, the more pain I've just experienced over and over again. But it's so wonderful to look at my recovery story differently in this moment, to know that when I was in my most painful states, ballroom found me, I found ballroom. And from there, my life story of healing is just very different. And I can tell it differently. And turning that pain into creativity, projects, you know, collective community organizing, mobilizing, and creating these spaces of transformation have helped me fully become human, recover, and live in love and happiness and joy. And just never being alone, and just having all these other peer professionals in some ways healing from their own, you know, conditions. You know, we turn them into our purpose, our meaning, our life's work. And, you know, I think one of the most powerful things that's holding me in this space right now is like, we've been able to utilize these stories and these feelings to shift hearts and minds, and the work that we need to do to change the social and political context in which we live that is causing the traumas and all this oppression and all the other things that we have to deal with as being well for our community. So generating recovery, healing, and peace across our community within the world that we live in is not changed by the facts. It's changed by our stories and the way that we share them and live with each other and have joy. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thank you so much. Jennifer, could I ask you, you know, for some folks who may still be a little bit unclear as to what house and ballroom is, could you just provide us with a very kind of simple, clear definition? Somebody has asked in the chat, just what is ballroom? And I'm wondering if you might just be able to go over that for us again.
Yeah. In the most simple way, it's like the most beautiful space. But it's, I would say, primarily sexual and gender expansive people of color who have chosen family, and we have kinship structures that are really supportive. And it is just a network of individuals who are able to not just have support, but have love and be in space with one another and to, transform their lives. I don't know. I think that's like kind of the easiest way I can explain it. I'm sure there's a more simple way, but.
Yeah, maybe I can just sort of add a couple of things into this that may help folks. Michael sort of referenced some of the sort of historical trajectory of this, that in many ways a crucial moment in the formation of what today we call house and ballroom is the Harlem Renaissance, where as a result of the Great Migration, you start to get these, beautiful urban concentrations of people of color. And we know that cities were really important in being able to make the spaces for queer folk to begin to find each other and form community. So up in Harlem, queer folk begin to find each other, start to form community, start to hold and host these balls, and start to form what becomes, the modern day ballroom, which is both a support structure, a support system, and also a space for incredible creative expression and creative exploration. What I often sort of think is one of the most radical things we have in the world, which is Black joy. So we see the expression of Black joy in the face of Jim Crow and all kinds of other forms of oppression being held and nurtured and nourished and amplified through this process. And then the sort of modern ballroom scene, which dates to the late 1960s, is really created by transgender women of color, who begin to then call the community into these formations that become these kinship formations, where you have, as Michael has mentioned, a mother and a father, and then folks who are chosen members of that family, who are the kin, who are the children. And these are they are support groups, they're a support system, but they're also this amazing multi-generational collective space for dance, for fashion, for every kind of creative work you can imagine. And the community comes together regularly in order to be able to celebrate itself and to teach and learn together. And Michael has mentioned his connection to Philadelphia. We've sort of seen ballroom now move to national prominence, and also to become actually an international movement, and an incredible space where queer folks of color are able to gather in support and in creativity, all right, sort of healing and nurturing and celebrating. And also to become a space of consciousness raising. Like, it reminds me a lot of the feminist movement, where you begin to, in a certain recovery sense, you tell your stories and you draw out of those stories the lessons that are going to help you move forward. So I hope that that's clear for folks, that this is the sort of context that we're speaking in. I think I'm going to hold off. I mentioned that I wanted just, to have you and Michael also sort of speak about COVID, because both of you are so deeply involved in COVID work at the moment, and that this is having a significant impact on the queer community of color in New York City and New York State more widely. As it, many recovery communities around the country are reporting the very devastating impact that COVID is having. But I'm going to hold back a little bit with that question for the moment, so that we can bring Michael Rice into this conversation. Michael Roberson gave you a great sort of prelude, an introduction, Michael Rice, in sort of talking about the way in which you really, through your work, have been mapping the complexity of substance use and sexuality and space. The club scene, which is so important as a kind of community forming and community holding space, a space of gathering for queer folks, that is a space both of support, lifting up, healing, a space of expression, and also a space of vulnerability and a space of risk. So I know, Michael, that you wanted to share with us a brief clip from Party Boy, so that we can sort of get a sense of the documentary and the way in which you are beginning to sort of claim this issue. I want to make for me, what is a very crucial point here is that Michael is a filmmaker, but the making of the film is not the end of things. The film is made as a resource for the community. it becomes an opportunity for and these are, maybe you can talk a little bit about this after the clip, Michael. It becomes an opportunity where the community gathers and is able to see this representation of its issues, to see it placed in context, to learn some of the history and the complexity that Michael Roberson, this intersectional complexity that Michael Roberson has been putting in place for us. And so in that sort of sense, you also work very much within, with, for, in the interests of, in the support of the recovery of this community that you're working with. Anyway, so I don't know if you want to say anything before we go to the clip, but I'll turn it over to you. Just, you need to come off mute.
Okay, once again, I forgot. Yes, when it comes to Party Boy mainly is a documentary about crystal meth addiction and use within the Black and Latinx community. And as a filmmaker, I saw a need. When we see Paris is Burning, we're getting a very observational viewpoint into the late 80s, early 90s era of the LGBTQ community within New York City. And, they saw a need to portray and put that image out there and let people know about this underground community that some didn't have a clue about the community. So when I created Party Boy, not only did I want to have aspects of things that were observational, but I wanted to also give a narrative about factual things that was taking place and that we need to wake up as a community. And I've been on this journey since 2017 due to the fact that I saw, as a Black gay man, I saw friends of mine that passed away from the use of crystal meth, amongst depression, and also passing away from AIDS. And so I thought it was very important that we.
Yeah. Michael, you have frozen and I think we have lost you. So maybe what we can do, folks, is as Michael just gets himself back into our gathering, can we go to the clip of the film and we will view it, and hopefully Michael will be able to be back with us. And Kristen Harper has just put in the chat, and let me sort of speak this aloud as well. So we do want to offer a brief trigger warning for this clip. There are a few images that may be difficult to watch. We lost you for a second there, Michael.
Yeah, sorry, the signal, internet, yeah, but yeah, it's a film I really wanted the community, and not only our community, not only the ballroom community, but I wanted the world to see what was happening when it came to this epidemic.
Thanks, Michael. So let's go to the clip now, and then we'll come back, and you can pick this up and take us further in this journey.
Crystal meth is impacting the Black gay community, but nobody wants to admit it. When we think of crystal meth, we think of it as really impacting white men, gay white men, and we don't think of it as ours. We need to take a step back and own what's happening, own what we see and what we don't see, and we need to talk about it because it's here, it's impacting us. It's unfortunate because when we start to really see the issue, it's when an individual or a person who's addicted and who's suffering hits rock bottom.
In making this film, I spoke to as many young queer Black and Latinos as I could. Many told stories of their first time seeing meth in their communities and witnessing meth terminology online and via cell phone apps.
I started to notice crystal meth becoming very popular in the Black gay community about 8 years ago when I was 15 going on 16.
Prior to a couple years ago, I didn't know, one, people my age did crystal meth, and then Black men did crystal meth.
This is glass grade. And you got crystals in here 2 inches, 3 inches long. This is pure glass. Every jibhead from here to Timbuktu is gonna want to taste. Man, I gotta try this.
No. Some were only familiar with meth from the television show Breaking Bad, which depicted crystal meth as a drug of the white middle class in rural America.
Way too much Miami Vice.
But others encountered it much closer to home.
It started getting offered to me a lot.
I went to that party. I did meth for the first time. Now, all I do is meth.
The first thing I think of when I think crystal meth is the white guys with the ruined teeth. I started to realize that it was actually a part of our community, and to see people actually use it and then to see the outcome.
I thought it was normally a white drug, you know, and to see that it's running rampant in the community, how intensely it's ravaging the youth, especially, it's insane.
That's when I first moved to Harlem. Pretty much, guys would approach me in Harlem. I would end up at their place.
Then I started learning that there are different terms for it and things.
And they would offer me Tina, but the way they offered it, it was like, I didn't understand it, and I actually did it twice.
I had a friend that did it, you know, and he told me don't worry about it until he loses his apartment. I'm like, that sounds like it's too late then.
I would just say it's not a smart choice. I would just say think of everybody in your life, your loved ones, your friends, your family, before you take this route, because when you take this route is taking you, not the other way around.
You're muted, Robert.
I'm on mute now. It's my turn. I'm on mute now. Michael Rice, do you want to open this up a little bit further for us now that we've seen this clip?
Well, in this particular clip, I wanted to show the aspects of people and their first experience hearing about crystal meth. I kind of fell in the same situation where I had no idea what crystal meth was. At the time, years ago, I thought it was a drug that was mainly in the white rural community. But as it really slowly came and started to trickle into the Black community, I knew we had a problem. So in that aspect of the film, it was pretty much people telling you their first experience about hearing about crystal meth, entering the Black and brown community and their experiences.
Yeah. You know, Michael, we knew we were going to get this question, but let's just deal with it now, and maybe we'll do it again as well. Folks are asking, you're getting a lot of life in the chat for the film clip. But also folks are interested in where they might be able to see this film in its entirety. I know that folks may need to be a little bit patient. So if you could just give us a quick sort of status report on that.
Okay, well, as of now, the film is only being seen by, universities, different organizations. We're doing private screenings, and I'm hoping eventually C4 will be able to have their own private screening for Party Boy. But my team and I are really working on the distribution, trying to get a distribution deal for this film because it's so important. I've honestly had a lot of interest from different production houses in LA and in New York and one overseas, but nothing has grabbed us yet. But so we're still waiting on it. But when it comes time to see Party Boy, it's pretty much on a organizational hospital-based level to where they would have to do a private screening or a film festival of this film. But if you go to the Party Boy Facebook page or at Party Boy Documentary Instagram, we have updates about screenings that we have coming up, and we do have a couple coming up in the next 2 weeks. So you can check it out at that time. So please stay tuned on social media if you go to partyboy.com or Party Boy Documentary.
All right, thanks so much. And Kristen Harper says C4 is working on it. So keep an eye on this space, and hopefully we can pull that off sooner rather than later. So I'm going to sort of back out again from all of this and go back to, in a way, all three of you. One of the things that I'm thinking about, and I thought about this very strongly, Jennifer, as you were talking, was that one of the options we have in dealing with issues of mental health and addiction is that we can think of what the community needs, and we can sort of bring the community into the intervention. Over the years that we've been working together, we've talked a lot about the notion that the community itself, in many ways, is the place where the intervention begins. And I think this is very deep recovery work. And this is the story of recovery. And it's very much the story of ballroom, beginning with the fact that in the face of homophobia, in the face of racism, in the face of poverty, the community had to find, as Michael said, a way out of no way. And that was to come together and to build family, and to build spaces and to hold spaces. So can we open that up a little bit and just sort of talk about what it means to think of community itself as always already a kind of recovery space, that in a way, things get brought into the community as opposed to the community being brought into the program. And maybe Michael Roberson, I can begin with you reflecting on that a little bit, and possibly the lessons that come out of AIDS work that have been so illuminating for us as we think about mental health and substance use disorders.
So it's very interesting you frame it that way. I look at ballroom, but I also look at Black gay cultural production as not a space of recovery, but a space of healing. Because recovery oftentimes suggests and necessary, but in resistant to. And healing to me suggests resiliency regardless, right? And so why do I say that? I'm blessed enough, one of the things that Robert didn't mention, and I didn't mention, that we are members of Ultra Red. And Ultra Red has been the biggest impact on sort of the advance of my political consciousness, if you will, and historicize that. So to me, it's not accidental that you're having this conversation, Jennifer and I, around this COVID moment, right? And that when I think about at the AIDS crisis in 1981, and Reagan was the president, and his neoliberal politics and cutting social programs, and a global pandemic emerges. We talk about Trump not having a national response for over a year. But Robert, as well as I, that Reagan had none for 7 years, right? But just to allow gay men to get infected and die. And because he was cutting social programs, crack emerges in 1984, and Black people made a political and intentional decision to not deal with AIDS, but to deal with crack. And his assertion was that if Black gay men were getting affected by AIDS, we deserved it. It was God's way of getting rid of perversion from the earth, and it was our punishment. So here is a global pandemic in relationship to Trump's neoliberalism, connected in dialogue with a drug epidemic. And so here we are now, Trump, right? Trump represents a shift in sort of from neoliberalism to fascism. And so what emerges is another global pandemic in dialogue with a drug epidemic, opioid, that gets that overshadows the crystal meth epidemic, right? And so I went to, this better than I went to seminary after getting fired from my organization. And I went because I wanted to engage theology in conversation with public health. So the space around recovery, because I thought that a theological abomination narrative have a direct impact on health disparities impacted, particularly Black gay men. Ergo, you tell people the very essence of who they are is abominable to God. It's antithetical to God, and then ask them to engage in factors to protect a body that's been told is no good to God. I wanted to shift that narrative, and that we do things in relation to that to self-medicate, right? And so hence why I love Michael's documentary, because crystal meth in many ways is that self-medication, but we could talk about other things. But what Michael Rice also does wonderfully in his documentaries took a look at ballroom as a countercultural response, but not response reacting resistant to recovery, but resiliency, because here's a community that has been organizing, as you wonderfully put, out of the Harlem Renaissance, migrating across the country like a freedom movement, morphing from drag ball to house ball, creating these political and theological structures before the AIDS epidemic. And so they have something to offer about what it means to use its cultural productions, theological response as a space of resiliency, as a space of healing. I think last thing I'll say to that, Jennifer, this is a good lead-in for you, that I remember, I forget the year, maybe 2014, 2015, where the governor, in relationship with the New York State Department of Health and Community Organizers, so Governor Cuomo, was talking about that because the CDC put out that for the very first time in the history of the AIDS epidemic, the new HIV infection rates were on a decline, except for with Black and Latino gay men, right? And that we knew in the state it was the same thing, and that largely these folks are gathered in the house ball community. So they created in response to that what they call the blueprint, the 2020 plan. By the year 2020, when it radically reduced new HIV infection rates, here's the universe speaking to us, had no idea that that would really be talking about COVID. Had no idea. So COVID emerges in the moment that they then had concretized through this blueprint that they wanted to radically reduce new HIV infection rates. Here is another pandemic. And so to me, the universe is then saying to us that, and I've said this for a long time, that public health is not, and public health can never save folk. Community organizing saves folk, but it's the relationship to pain and suffering. But what ballroom has to offer is what you just said, Robert, this radical joy in response, irregardless of, it continues to create this space of joy. And that for me is healing and resiliency versus resistance and recovery.
So Michael, I'm gonna pick up on that and ask you just to take one more step with us, which is the mental health step. And especially for young folk, because this has been a real challenge for the ballroom scene, for the queer community. Registering what you talked about, just a little bit earlier, the abomination narrative, really trying to find a way in which there is a sense of one's divinity, of one's right to be who one is.
So thank you, because you reminded me one of the things I wanted to invoice through this. So 2010 is one of the, I am a father of so many folk. And so one of my sons, Joseph Jefferson, he's home with his boyfriend. They're watching the cartoon or Happy Feet, the movie Happy Feet. He goes outside, takes out the trash. He comes back in and he's irritated. And they begin a discussion. And he talks about all these things and sort of de-escalate this discussion. He talked about tired of working so hard, about not getting anywhere. The conversation de-escalates. And he then goes to bed and he says to his lover, "Are you going to go to bed with me?" The lover then says, "I'm going to stay up and finish watching this and I will then join you." The lover fell asleep on the couch overnight, woke up to hearing my son's alarm clock. So he calls into the room. And so my son never answered. He walks into the room and my son had taken some clippers and shaved off all of his facial hair and the hair on his head and hung himself from the ceiling fan. And what he wrote on Facebook the night before was that he could no longer live in a world that's grown so cold to those who live out of the social norm. Now here's a young man. He was out about being HIV positive. He was out about being Black and gay. He worked for organizations. He had relationship to resources. But the pain of being told that the very essence of who you are, I don't think there's anything more devastating, disadvantageous you can tell a human being, that the very essence of your being, your breathing, is antithetical, particularly in Black folk, in the space of Black folk and our Black freedom movement, that is antithetical to that in which we call God or that in which you call universe. Nothing more. But he had access to, and he still made a decision to do that. And I have oftentimes said that as the report had put out, there was a large number of LGBT young folk who were committing suicide. I oftentimes have said that a lot of the times, because of religious doctrine, that Black gay men won't necessarily take their lives because they've been told that you're going to hell. Will begin to unconsciously put self-destructive behaviors in their lives so that they're slowly killing themselves over time, that death is inevitable because they've been told that your death is inevitable simply because the intersection of your Blackness and your gayness is not divine enough.
Thank you. So here we're hearing now about the way in which, there are these vulnerabilities that emerge from within communal life, and the deep treasures in many ways of the history of Blackness, of Black culture. The church has been a space where the community is called together. The church has been a space of political organizing. The church has been a space of resistance, and now it also becomes a space of exclusion and of violence in some way, and that we need to think of recovery work healing work within the context of that. So Jennifer, I'm going to sort of go to you because I know that you have some things to share with us, which is, things that are becoming visible through the COVID crisis that in a way is sort of illuminating how the deep practice of community to be able to actually take advantage, to be creative, to find ways of surviving, is also sort of illuminating what an incredible recovery resource community is. And I wonder if you could sort of share some of that with us.
Sure. So first, I just want to say that, to imagine yourself in the future is a radical act of hope. And I think hope, really, like the belief that these challenges and conditions can be overcome, is our foundation of healing in the community, right? And so during COVID, you have the disproportionate impact of death and dying and cases among people of color, and then further, inequities among queer people of color at that, and so much death and all these other things that are happening at this time. So it takes these kind of streams of a global pandemic, social and political unrest for people to, in a city that's shut down, for people to find new space within their city that they might not have had access to before. So, I think, Michael Roberson was talking earlier about, this Harlem Renaissance. Well, in this moment of like being shut down, you start thinking about that hope of, okay, what's the future going to be like? Who am I in this moment? Who do I want to be in the future? And what do I need to do right now to get there? And having this moment to step back and reflect around that hope in this community, and especially for my Black trans sisters, who I think were just pumping out so many creative things. And there were so many calls around building new ideas, really putting their dreams to fruition, and having access to a city that was really quiet, and being able to film here and do this and shoot a photo shoot over here and do these things just brought a collective healing, but a collective building, a collective organizing around their liberation, their freedom, and their own struggle to survive in a different way, as more having access to different pieces of a life that were not so accessible previously. And so you witness this new and rejuvenated energy around collectives of, Black trans folks, and the creation of all these new projects, which will all be unleashed through this year. And we'll be able to see what something like this did to, in a positive way, around that hope, to create so many new spaces for people to collaborate, work together, heal together, and develop and implement things together in this beautiful way. New businesses, new entrepreneurships, the list goes on, and that has been a source of joy for me to bear witness to that kind of creativity, artistic expression, and people finding their joy in their life, joy for work in their own ways, without having the same restrictions or that everyday on the go mentality of just trying to get through the day and get home safely. And I think, just holding power for community and keeping community centered in all this really helps speak truth to our power and what value we have in this world. And people are really not their disease. It doesn't matter what we deal with. It's a piece of who we are, but we're much more than that. So I'll leave it there just to keep it short. I know we're running out of time.
Thank you so much. And I just want to sort of amplify this point that, has been shared with us in so many of the community conversations that we've been a part of, that for a trans woman of color to be able to leave her home, to go about her business, and to return to her home at the end of the day is a radical act of survival. And this notion that during lockdown, the streets have in effect, in a certain sense, become safer, because all of that potential violence, all of that risk from folks who carry and hold their transphobia in such aggressive ways, that this has been lifted a bit, and that in this space community is forming, and that folks are finding ways of being creative and of healing. It's a remarkable story. So in the, we are reaching the end of our hour. Michael Rice, I want to just give you a space to sort of maybe reflect. I know you've shown your film, you've had multiple conversations, you've been listening to the community be in conversation around your film and through your film and the issues it raises. And I wonder if there are things that you are hearing in those conversations that speak to the way in which the community sort of holds each other in the process of recovery.
One of the things that I hear about the most is that there's a lack of actually having a facility that could actually help the community, a place that we can go to.
You mean sort of treatment resources or community gathering resources?
Well, more actually like a rehab center that is specifically for Black, queer, or queer folks who are dealing with crystal meth addiction, or that actually treats crystal meth addiction. We have multiple, rehabs and havens for people that have other situations and addictions happening. But when it comes to crystal meth, I feel that we need something that is very specific to that for our community specifically.
Okay. Michael Roberson, did you want to jump in on that?
Just that I want to lift up the work that Tim Lanvin, Tim Tobias, and Mike Haynes Ebony and other leaders in the houseball community are doing around organizing around sort of crystal meth and its impact on the houseball community. And they created an initiative, if you will, called Ballroom with Care that have been organizing for the past 2 years because they begin to see this outcry, particularly on social media. There were particularly 2 of them that was an outcry on social media, and then the folks wind up dying maybe a month or so later. So they have been organizing in real profound ways. So just want to lift them up.
Yeah. And this, Michael, makes me think of, going back to the AIDS crisis, the many sort of lessons, the kind of epidemic thinking and the epidemic knowledge. I mean, you and I, at the very beginning of COVID, would sort of, reflect with each other about how, in a certain sense, especially for the Black queer community, we've been in an epidemic for 40 years. And so we've had epidemic thinking and the thinking around questions of risk and the thinking around how you organize and navigate your life in some way. But, a crucial moment in the history of the AIDS crisis was the ability for the Black queer community to be able to begin to form its own organizations and to create its own resources in some way. And I think this is crucial, to have recovery spaces that really know how to hold the complexity and the richness of these histories. And maybe this is, I know we are in the final minutes. I just want to say to everybody who's been writing in the chat, I've been keeping an eye on it. Thank you so much for all of your affirmations. Thank you so much for your sharing, for your acknowledgement, the amens, the resonances. It's just really powerful to hear that what we are saying also speaks to your experience and the knowledge and encounters that you're having with your community. We will definitely save the chat so that we can actually all have an opportunity to read through it. And we really hope that we will be together soon for a screening of Party Boy, and that there are other forums in which we can be able to gather together. So in the final sort of 60 seconds, does anybody want to have one sort of last thought, something that's just really on the tip of your tongue that you just want to be sure to say regarding this issue before we close out today?
I just want to say, always make sure, no matter what community you're in, but in very particular to our panel, the queer community, always be an ear, always be someone to listen, and always be someone to encourage. And one thing I make it an aspect for myself to do when it comes to queerness, especially Blackness, is always to give support. And that's one thing I wanted to leave with.
Well, thank you so much to the 3 of you. I mean, this is Black Lives Matter in the most profound way. And I am so grateful to have you as family, and to have had an opportunity to have opened our conversation, which has been, years and years of an endless conversation, to have opened it to this forum for just a short hour. And we'll be in touch sooner rather than later.
And we thank you, Robert. We thank you for doing such an absolutely wonderful job.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, brother. Thank you. Yes, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Kristen, do you want to say a final goodbye?
Yes, thank you so much, all of you, from the bottom of our hearts. That was just a phenomenal discussion. And you can tell by the comments in the chat, like Robert said. I'll just say quickly to our audience, join us next month for the next Recovery Live. We'll be doing addiction recovery in the family, however family is defined. And we are excited also to get your feedback through the audience survey, which you'll get post event. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe.
Love to all. Find joy.